Now to what was once called the Forgotten War, the conflict in Afghanistan. It is forgotten no more, especially in the United Kingdom, whose soldiers have been paying a shocking price in blood in recent days. In the current offensive, 8 British servicemen were killed in one 24-hour period. 2 of them were just 18 years old. America's closest ally is suddenly facing questions over whether its troops are equipped for the task that they face. Here's the BBC's defence correspondent, Caroline Wyatt.
British forces are still on the offensive in the treacherous green zone of Helmand province, trying to push back the Taliban on Operation Panther's Claw. They say their recent losses have only made them more determined. But back at home, the government has come under increasing political attack as the death toll in Helmand rises.
People will say, especially today, and rightly, that our urgent priority is to get the right equipment to our forces on the front line. They are right. Of course we must do that. It is a scandal in particular that they still lack enough helicopters to move around in southern Afghanistan. The government must deal with that issue as a matter of extreme emergency.
The Prime Minister rejected accusations that he was selling Britain's troops short.
If we are to defeat this vicious insurgency and by doing so make Britain and the world a safer place, then we must persist with our operations in Afghanistan. I am confident that we are right to be in Afghanistan, that we have the strongest possible plan, and we have the resources needed to do the job.
The Liberal Democrat leader said the government must now lower its ambitions and raise its funding for the troops in Helmand.
Since our troops first stepped into Afghanistan, the government strategy has been over-ambitious in aim and under-resourced in practice. And isn't it time now to commit the necessary resources and set a reasonable goal?
Even within the MOD, senior military figures have been concerned for some time that Britain simply isn't allocating enough resources to defence because they don't match the many tasks the armed forces are being asked to carry out. And now a respected military think tank has warned that the defence budget could face cuts of up to 15% over the coming years. That's prompted one of the country's most senior military figures to speak out.
Governments have underinvested for far, far too long. They all say defence is the thing which comes first, and yet they don't put their money where their mouth is. If you really want to have an army and a navy and an air force which you can commit to battle, you must fund them properly.
Do you think that lives have been put at risk on the front lines?
I think this is a very difficult question to answer, but I have undoubtedly some people, if they've been travelling in helicopters as opposed to vehicles which were not properly protected, have been killed. So the answer must be yes.
Critics say the biggest shortage is of helicopters, especially Chinooks, the workhorses of the skies, which can keep troops safely off the ground, away from improvised explosive devices laid on Helmand's dangerous roads. Britain has a total of 40 Chinooks, but only 20 that are suitable for conditions in Afghanistan that are available to deploy. And just 8 to 10 are being used there, with little hope of sending more out quickly.
The training requirement and the pilot shortages and the restrictions on aircraft numbers are not simply achieved by moving aircraft. You've got to have all the backup that is required, and that takes considerable time, years in some cases, to get up to speed.
15 British lives have been lost in Helmand so far this month, 8 in the bloodiest day last week. And back at home, the questions are unlikely to go away. Does Britain need more troops in Helmand, and what will success look like? And above all, as the bodies of the dead make their final journey home, how long will this mission take? Caroline Wyatt, BBC News.
Across the border in Pakistan today, a bomb blast killed at least 13 people. The explosion occurred in the central Punjab province at the home of a cleric who was giving Quran lessons to children at the time. The attack came just as some of the 2 million people displaced by the Pakistani Army's military offensive recently against the Taliban in the Swat Valley started returning home. What they'll find on their return is far from certain. David Loyne reports from Islamabad.
Waking up for the last time in a camp, the human wave of people flooding down from the hills and valleys of the northwest frontier and the fighting this year goes into reverse today as the tide changes and the government says it's time to go home. They're packing the tents and cooking equipment handed out as emergency supplies as they do not know what to expect when they return. Pakistan's armed forces used considerable firepower, including artillery, to force out the Taliban, and many homes were destroyed. UN agencies have secured an agreement from the government that the return should be voluntary, and in some camps people are staying put while they argue for better compensation. And there are other concerns too. Imran Khan says he wants to take his family back, but is frightened both of government forces and the Taliban. He says he'll only go home if it's safe. The problem is that no one can guarantee safety. The military have secured the roads with a heavy armed presence on the ground and helicopter gunships roaming the skies. But Taliban militants have melted away for now and could restart their offensive any time. Junaid Khan says they don't know what to expect when they go home, what the conditions are, whether there'll be any food. The Pakistan government say that this time it'll be different in the northwest frontier. They'll provide security and then bring services like power, water and better schools. The return of these displaced people is a big test of their political resolve to bring government where there was none before. David Loyne, BBC News, Islamabad.
Now to the war in Afghanistan. 4 more American servicemen were killed today, making this the deadliest year for US and UK troops since the conflict began in 2001. Meanwhile, in the southern city of Kandahar, a number of simultaneous attacks killed at least 40 civilians. And the clouds are gathering over last week's presidential election as well. The BBC has obtained more evidence of corruption, with ballot papers dumped by the roadside. The BBC's Ian Pannell reports now from Kabul.
For 8 years, they fought and died in Afghanistan. A battle against the Taliban, but also a fight for stability and democracy. This election was to be a shining moment. Millions turned out to cast their vote. But now there are concerns that the election may be seriously flawed.
Excellency, Mr. Hamid Karzai has received 212,927 votes.
Today we got the first results. Just 10% of votes counted, and Hamid Karzai has 40%, his nearest challenger 38%. With many votes still to be tallied, this is likely to change.
It was widely crafted and engineered to steal the process, to steal the votes by the incumbent, by Mr. Karzai and its relevant authorities. So that outcome we will not allow.
We were given a secret recording by the Abdullah campaign. The man on the left appears to be ticking the box for Hamid Karzai on sheet after sheet of voting papers. If this is authentic, then it would be a serious breach of election law. It's not the only allegation of fraud. This is what remains of hundreds of votes for another candidate. They should have been placed in a ballot box. Instead, they were found ripped up and dumped by the roadside. Mirwaz Yassini has handed them over to investigators. He calls this the slaughter of democracy in Afghanistan.
It is a coup d'etat. It's not an election. And if I do not object that, then I will be mischieving with my constituent, with my nation, with my supporter. And I don't want to dodge them. I don't want to deceive them. I would like to be realistic.
For now, it's impossible to say quite how widespread the rigging has been. But there's a growing unease that the West was too quick to declare this process a success and a victory for the Afghan people. And there's a real concern now that democratic principles are being put at risk.
This has been the worst year for American and British troops since 2001. They fought hard to make areas safe for voting. Many died or were wounded. Reports to the BBC from locals in parts of Helmand where British forces have been most active suggest a low turnout. In Nadali, population 60,000, just 600 people voted. In Kajaki, population 55,000, only 300 are believed to have turned out. And in Babaji, scene of the fiercest fighting, just 150 people are reported to have voted. The Afghan Election Commission refused to comment on these figures. Tonight, the Taliban attacked again. A massive car bomb in Kandahar, leaving dozens dead and many injured. This is what scares ordinary Afghans. It's what kept many away from the polls. And whatever the outcome of this election, it's what British and American forces will still have to deal with. Ian Pannell, BBC News, Kabul.
The British Prime Minister Gordon Brown has paid a surprise visit to British troops in Afghanistan. He went to the Camp Bastion and Lashkar Gah bases in Helmand province. The Prime Minister promised the troops that were there greater protection from improvised explosive devices and hinted that more troops may need to be sent to train the Afghan army. James Landell has been travelling with the Prime Minister and sent this report.
There are some who've accused Gordon Brown of not doing enough to support British forces. But this is his fourth visit to Afghanistan in a year and another chance to talk to troops on the front line. He's hoping that better protection for British forces might just make it less of one. James Landell, BBC News in Helmand province.